You are watching Access LaPorte County Channel 97. Coming up next is the March 16th workshop for the Michigan City Board of Public Works and Safety. You can find more information for this meeting by visiting www.accesslaportecounty.org.
All right, in the meantime, I guess we will go ahead and get started. It is 8:33 on Monday, March 16th, and this is our second workshop for the board or the police department's manuals. So I will turn it over to the chiefs.
Again, obviously, right, thank you. Again, I'm sure you guys have enjoyed the last week or so reading, the second half of our policy manual that we provided for you. Again, talking earlier, right, and learning a whole lot about the department inside and outs, I'm sure. And again, like we were discussing earlier, I think these are things in which we've obviously come to know and just operate by, every day. So we're reviewing them, hopefully, right, you guys get a good insight in how we do things and how we operate. First off, I think I wanted to touch on 302, right? We had some questions on that, or some edits, right, that needed to make on policy 302 from before. Let's see, section, I think it was, 302.4.2, if I remember right.
Yes.
And then section
D. J and K.
Section D is the J and K, right? So essentially, section D, I think, was missing, right? The chief of police will determine whether the board should delay its review or not. So that is spelled out now.
Oh, it's the chief of police.
Correct. And then as you go down to, again, same thing in J, right? Section J, the chief of police shall review the recommendation, make a final decision as to whether the member's actions were within policy or procedure and determine whether any additional actions, investigations, or review are appropriate. And then ultimately in section K, at the conclusion of any reviews, copies of all relevant reports, information will be filed with the Division of Professional Standards. So obviously made those edits, made those those updates, right? So I think those were essentially some missing fields, right? Missing those people there. So again, made those updates. And then I think ultimately for this week on the agenda, we had section 6 through
11.
6 through 11, right?
Right, Tamika?
Yes.
Again, we spoke briefly earlier. I don't know, Chief Shaparsky, maybe if you want to pull up one of those 600 policy, maybe which one didn't we have before we think of it?
So 605 is Brady Giglio information. This is a policy.
Real quick before you start.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to touch on, I know we've talked about like best practices, essentially what Lexipol does for us, right? We talk about, right, being the best practices throughout the, using their connections throughout the country to be obviously best practices and in line with other law enforcement agencies across the country, and then also following state, right, and federal guidelines. Again, you don't see these in your final draft mode. Like when we're in draft mode, you can see, when we are reviewing these things, we see like where it says best practices, state mandates and whatnot. So again, when we're putting these things in place for us, these are the guidelines that it shows. Again, helps us give those notification or those that information, right? That is important and pertinent to us, so we can fall in line with again these things. Again, a lot of times too, when it says like state modified, it's really us just changing the terminology, right? Sometimes the Lexipol just use terminology where it says like, yeah, there you go. Chief Sparsky's on it, right? So it says Detective Bureau, right? For us, that's the investigative division. So those are like the modifications that you can see that ultimately we made to make it personal to us, right? Which is very minimal on the grand scheme of things, but again, those things help us, again, like we keep saying, right? It's helping us get in best practices, and this is how we were able to determine, what those best practices are across the country, and or state mandates and or federal mandates. So again, it helps us get just that better explanation when we're reviewing those. Again, on the final product, you don't see that.
Yeah.
It just has the title sections there. So sorry, I just wanted to explain that and show that to you and just give a little information on that. So
No, I appreciate that.
Chief Shaparsky, sorry. Thank you.
So I think I met with obviously like the chief said, sorry I wasn't here at the previous meeting. I had a training obligation that I was at, but in speaking with them, it seems like maybe something that is warranted amongst this discussion is kind of showing you what does a policy look like that is brand new that we're adding, maybe like a why for that, but then also show you some of these where we can show you that it's essentially taking our old policy, putting into this new format, and just kind of how that's visualized. One big one that we've been focusing on internally, not only with our people, but also with our cooperation with the prosecutor's office, is the Brady Giglio policy. And something has not been in effect ever. And that's mainly because there's always been Brady Giglio with police officers. Essentially, it's any of your actions that violate, or that an investigation internally or something that happens to that officer in the way that they're conducting their business that can attack their credibility in the court system. So prior, that was all handled essentially by prosecutors. When a case goes to trial, there's questions that are asked of an officer that address Brady Giglio. However, back in April of 2025, Indiana passed a law that now puts the onus on the elected prosecutor and the administration of the agency, any agency within that prosecutor's kind of county, if you will, that essentially obligates the prosecutor to maintain a Brady Giglio list, which would be like a list of officers that fall under a specific guidelines and categories that the state now mandates. In that new law as well, there's specific things that direct us as to what we have to disclose ahead of things, right? So if there's an officer that gets arrested and charged with a criminal offense, we have to disclose that even if they are not named in a specific trial at the given time. So that was a huge thing that prompted changes in the way we're keeping our personnel packets, but also the establishment of a Brady Giglio policy. The great thing is with Lexipol, what we're dealing with is that they already have a policy that's built, both supported by best practices within law enforcement, but also supported by the new state law. And so 605 is essentially the result of that, right? It clearly defines, your Brady Giglio information, what that includes, the policy, and it just talks about, in here, you can see these best practice ones are, section 605.3. That's a best practice that Lexipol offered us to give us some guidance, but then they also included the state mandated portion, which is the Brady Giglio process and disclosure of that information. So a lot of times when we see us implementing new policies, it's not a subjective thing that we are doing, but more so, hey, we're not covered here, and I'm sure Amber can attest to this, where it's like, the more robust our policies are, the more that they cover, the more that we can direct officers, but also when it comes time to justify what we're doing, we're just more supported and more backed. And that's really the sell that we've been telling the body, kind of the police department, but also why there's just more now. I'm sure as Chief Porker alluded, it's been some years since we've updated and, how policing is essentially governed now, right? There's a lot more dynamic, changes that take place, which is what this is going to solve for us. But getting over that initial hurdle here with you guys is the big one in terms of getting into the new system. So Brady Giglio was a good one that we kind of highlighted in the 600s. And again, if you guys have questions, obviously feel free to stop.
Like unmanned aircraft, right? That's something that's essentially new for us, right? We start talking about drones, right? So, getting a good policy, obviously that works for us, but again, also that's following, right, those best practices throughout the country, the state, and because there are some state and federal mandates, on that stuff, so it's making sure we're in compliance, when we do put up a drone, and
we already have, that's the other thing is with like our drone, we already have the biggest thing for law enforcement is getting a COA set up, which essentially is like an umbrella over the department where you have one person who's taken all the tests, certified, knowledgeable, and then they can kind of oversee the program as a whole, which then covers both liability, but then also gives us that that kind of roadmap of what we need to do with our actual drones themselves. But again, this is a new policy, but obviously we've been doing this already kind of in our day-to-day interactions or day-to-day operations.
And again, if there's specific ones that you kind of, if you want to go through, be more than happy to. Again, another new one I think for us is like 610 is forensic genetic genealogy. That's you see some of those cold cases and stuff like that, right? Where they're using, 23andMe and stuff like that, taking old DNA from, old cold cases and then submitting them through, some of these genealogy companies and stuff like that. So again, it just helps us give us, obviously, right, some defined practices and or how to go about doing that, and analyzing that data and stuff like that. And then again, it even goes into third-party DNA samples, in which you could collect from essentially family members, right? If you are able to get some DNA back, you can start narrowing the scope of that down. And again, just something that we didn't really have or wasn't really in law enforcement back in 2018, but now that the science and stuff behind that genealogy has come a long way. So again, they are seeing some of that stuff. I know the county has had some success in some of their cold cases and doing some of that stuff. But again, it just something we didn't have, but it's a new policy for us. And again, this is something that we have in place.
You're saying you've been following these policies, just now they are written down in your.
Correct.
Yep.
Chief Shaparski, was there any other ones you wanted to necessarily highlight?
If you guys go to in section 7, we'll give kind of a real explanation of like where we get to implement some existing things. So equipment such as 7, and then it's 701, it's personal communication devices. You'll see up here where there's agency content. That is what Lexipol took and, for example, placed into the policy here. Because a lot of these best practices that you see up on the screen, or if it says discretionary, usually what they did is they took our policy and blended it together. And if there's something specific that we asked or that was straight from one of our policies, that's how it's listed in here. And so you'll see this a lot in like the personnel section. Because just because of the makeup of our department and some of the existing policies we already have were even more robust, if you will, than what was initially built in here. And then also over the course of this whole process, when the three of us sat down and went through these policies, we would be able to go in and change certain wording under best practices, under any section rather. A lot of state mandated sections we didn't touch just because they are what the state provides. But when you see a best practice, discretionary, or agency up here, then that again is kind of evident of us coming in and just making some nuances based on our organization structure, our day-to-day that we do, or any other details that we wanted to add to make it stronger.
Look on 705 there. So this one actually, right, so when we sat down on Friday to essentially to make the adjustments to the use of force or the review board, we had updates essentially from Lexipol sitting in our inbox, right, and I just remember this one specifically just because it was PPE. Right, so there was essentially updates waiting for us, right? Like we haven't even enacted these things, but there was already current updates to these, and essentially I believe they were all state type mandates, right? In 705, oh, you reverted changes.
I didn't revert changes.
No, you don't. Yeah,
I'm not going to.
Yeah, don't revert.
I was just seeing if I could get up to see if I could Show them the changes.
But if I remember right, isn't this section, there's some state mandates?
Yeah, they updated some state codes in this section.
Yeah, 701.9.
So like this code changed, so it prompted us to update the policy with just a simple code change, right? And these are things that happen, I don't know, I'd say we've probably gotten like, since I've been involved with this, there's probably been a half a dozen changes, subtle changes to the policies that we're able just to kind of implement right away, which is something that we have never been able to do from a policy standpoint. It's just been 2018 and then every 10 years, whatever it is, you update, but
So again, I think, just having those updates, obviously, once we get through the bulk of these things, having those updates available, it'll be easier, right, for us to go, okay, here's the recommended changes, easy to send to, Attorney LePage, and then get them in front of, the Board of Works at, next meeting or whatnot, and, we can make some of those easy language changes. Again, I think they'll be much, much more simpler, and I think, just staying on top of it, right, so we don't get to, review 800 plus pages. Right? We can review simple section updates, right, as opposed to. So again, I think, I just wanted to point that one out. This one I know was, again, sitting there waiting for us to review and update. Obviously, it was nice we were able to update before.
But even that example is a good example of the depth of what they're facing, because that dealt with federal law and in the administrative code. So you're not even in state statute. So, I mean, they have so much in their department coming at them at all times with case law, administrative rules. So
Yeah, and we're talking about,
this
right,
tool is so valuable.
personal protection equipment, right? We're talking about, gloves and gas masks and stuff like that, right? So again, it's stuff that we don't necessarily think of day to day, right? I'm not following federal law regarding PPE. That's not really high on my, priority list, but it does matter, right? So it's important that we do have that.
So if we go back to 704, I think this is another good example because it kind of will highlight a couple of things. But 704 is cash handling and security and management of cash within our department. So you'll see, this policy is pretty generic in best practice until you get down to routine cash handling, which highlights kind of a unique part of our department where it talks about, obviously, within our records, they handle cash, but one big agency or one big part of our department is the LaPorte County Drug Task Force. Now, that's a joint jurisdictional agency, so that requires some, specific policy layouts here because it involves approval from multiple agencies, not just your own. The commander could be from any of the agencies, but then detectives are assigned there from Michigan City as well. And so this would be an example where in this section we had to input and add a specific guidelines as it relates to cash handling in LaPorte County Drug Task Force. And by comparison, our old policy, you'll go down and it was expenditures of more than $1,000 had to be required by the approval by the chief of police. Now, in 2018, $1,000 was probably somewhere low to mid end of a buy that they may do or an expenditure they have. The reality now, everything's more expensive. LaPorte County Drug Task Force has grown. Their budget has grown from starting off at around $50,000 a year. Now it's all the way up north of $300,000 to $500,000 a year. And so the idea that you have to get the chief's approval to spend $1,000 when that is very minuscule in a day. So we were to update some of those terms, and ultimately this money, the cash and money is managed also by the federal government too through the grant program. So this is a good example too where you'll see throughout a lot of these policies, you'll see a kind of a section that's unique to us, kind of like we were talking about earlier. So.
And again, we brought it up earlier prior to, but like 706, right? That's one where Lexipol didn't necessarily have a utility, right? A police utility knife safety and usage policy, right? But again, when you look at it, this is agency content, right? So they essentially took our content, put it under obviously the Section 7 for equipment, and it's just a simple policy on right, a police utility knife.
Mainly that's because we issue a knife. So if we're going to issue somebody something from a department standpoint and ask them to require them to carry it, that's where this policy comes into place.
So he was very specific.
Yeah, yeah. So we have guidelines on it, right? You know, again, you know, and like Chief alluded to, right? It's something that, you know, the police department is issuing to somebody, right? So we should have a policy and or procedure on how to use and how to operate that, you know, essentially equipment. And I don't know if you want to go down to like 807.
Here, I'm going to jump up to
Yeah.
806 first. So this would be another, this 806 is the FBI CJIS security, cybersecurity. You know, hot topic here in the city in the last few months, but this was a policy that did not exist. But as we all kind of crawl out of the kind of awakening event that I would call this whole thing, we were able to implement this policy because as the way we manage our data is just fundamentally different than even on a municipal level. We have to keep certain data protected by CJIS level, which is just a level of security that's required when you're dealing with extremely sensitive or information. And so, you know, this really helped. This is kind of future-proof, right? This addresses kind of where we are now, but also where we're going to look at going. And then just how to protect the data, and then some of our own, there is our own, some of our own verbiage in here as well. Because the way that obviously IT is for us at this department, we have 2 dedicated IT personnel that kind of run point on all that. That hasn't always been true for the Michigan State Police Department. Sometimes it was an officer that maintained that stuff, but now we have to lay out their IT's responsibilities as well within our policies, especially when it comes to the cybersecurity and the way that we're managing our data. So that was another one that kind of came up that we took some time on as well. We talk about 807.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is just you know, an agency content one where, again, Lexipol really didn't have a policy right on our essentially pill drop box, right, that we have in the front lobby in which people can, you know, come in and dump, you know, pills, you know, discard of old medications and whatnot. And again, just another example of how we implement, right, our agency content into the Lexipol essential format, right? So again, falls under, you know, Section 8 for us is, you know, essentially a support service, and again, still allows us, puts us in line to still allow the community to come in and drop those pills off. And the manner in which we should handle those things is all laid out, right? So there's those checks and balances of getting put into, right, evidence storage and whatnot, and then ultimate disposal of those collected medications as well. So.
For a fun fact, there's guidelines for how much time we can hold on to these things. We're partnered with the DEA, so every I think it's like 2 to 3 times a year they do that drug take back program. And so not only is that where they will put people in, you know, CVS's and like you can come and drop your pills off, but ours, the way that we run our disposal for our prescription pill drop box is essentially that's a DEA pill drop box, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And then we, every time DEA does one of their takebacks, we actually compile all those pills that we've collected from within our evidence vault, and we take those to the DEA and they dispose of them. This is a great thing because one, it saves us time and money because we don't have to go and try to incinerate these things ourselves, but it's also it's a nationwide program that we've been partaking in for it's been probably 10 years now.
Yeah.
At least, and so it's just a unique and very cool system that their program that they have that alleviates a lot of logistical issues from a department standpoint when we're trying to dispose of mass quantities of prescription pills and such. anytime you're dealing with, so Section 9's custody, I think, in my own opinion, over the last probably 10 years, there's been a lot of in-custody issues that's been litigated from a police standpoint. And so you had an increased amount, in my opinion, of like direction and objective hurdles you have to abide by here when we're keeping an adult, but especially a juvenile in custody. I mean, the amount of securities and parameters of what we're allowed to do and not allowed to do has become extremely dynamic. Like in the past, you know, you would keep a juvenile separate in a cell, and now you can only put a juvenile in a cell if they're a certain age and there's certain crimes involved. And so you see this temporary, like the 901's the temporary custody of juveniles. I mean, it spells out exactly what we can do and what we already are doing for that matter. But, you know, there's so much more Indiana code and federal law imposed in these. And so if you were to look at kind of our old custody, if you will, policy, it was a single policy and it was very general. It kind of checked the major boxes, but essentially that policy got blown up into, you know, 2-3 policies in here that are just backed again more by those state mandates and things of that nature, and federal mandates. Same thing with like searches. Obviously, there's lots of nitty gritty in there.
Yeah. It's crazy. I've been telling you.
You know, but again, it's important, you know, to highlight again. I think showing like kind of this format, you kind of see where some of these federal guidelines and whatnot when it comes to those policies, right, that are in place. You know, so again, so showing that our stuff is we're in line and doing things the right way. You know, there's no doubt in my mind. Was the 1012 Kyle? Was that the record that says we gotta keep on stuff?
Personnel one, this was one we spent a lot of time on. We have a lot of our vacation policies or sick leave policies.
HR, this is all you.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of nuanced stuff in there, and I think more importantly, we wanted to build out these policies. If, you know, organizationally speaking, you know, we change, but you'll see this vacations one especially. I mean, it's all our agency content, right? Because we have very specific needs in Michigan City. You know, for example, you'll see we have a restricted time between July 1st through the first Monday of September where there was a very, very limited amount of employees that are off because summertime, lots of events, you know, everybody's working a lot during that time. And so you know, obviously Lexipol couldn't quite bridge out that far in terms of what we needed. And so this is where you really see a heavy lean into our existing policies. But then also taking opportunities to kind of build them out from 2018, especially when, you know, certain, you know, if the police department were to go to 12-hour shifts, or if we're going to be, you know, continuing to need and add specialty units or divisions to meet the needs of the city as it grows, our policies now are kind of more are more built to withstand those changes and to take on those changes versus, you know, locking us into this police already has a patrol division and investigative division, right? It's much more robust than that these days. But
this is just a general question, but has the department increased greatly since 18 as far as number of police staffing? Yeah.
No, I mean, ultimately, since then, we've always been slotted for 84 officers. We haven't been at that. Knock on wood, we have 4 that are completing the final process of that right now, which will bring us to 84. So we're hopefully here in the next month or so, we'll be at full staff. But we haven't increased the amount of personnel allowed, right?
It's a little attrition. They really narrowed that down because when I first came over, we had 100 and some officers.
Right. Yeah.
And that was in 1970.
Right. You know, and again, it's kind of fluctuated, I think, over the years. I think when I started, we had like 95, and you know, we've kind of trickled down to that. You know, I think our plan is hopefully, and not, you know, as the city grows and develops, that obviously I think we need to grow and develop before that, right? You know, so we can't wait for the city to expand before we add officers, right? I think, you know, so, you know, our first goal is to get to 84, and then once we get there, I think, you know, we'll look to,
No, I'm looking at you.
to expand.
Yeah.
1,000.
And everybody's happy.
This is a big one, personnel complaints. This is essentially our personnel complaint and internal investigations policy. This was again, you know, you have the feels like ever changing civil side of police matters and things of that nature, where I feel like our internal complaints policies need constant revision and updating. You know, I think that we've really identified in this policy, you know, established kind of a level of complaints, right? Not if somebody calls in and says, hey, officer just drove by me, he's going too fast. You know, it doesn't necessarily need a full-blown internal affairs investigation, you know, into that officer, albeit if that's just it. And so this policy really kind of paints out, right, an informal, formal, you know, type of complaints, you know, what types of sources are to the complaints and all those kind of things. But then, you know, one big thing that also changed for us is by policy in 2018, for example, when the policy was created, if you got a write-up, right, if someone, not a suspended day off, but a formal write-up for some kind of disciplinary action, that would event that by policy, it would leave your personnel packet after 2 years. Now, the law, it doesn't say that, right? That policy conflicts with the law. The law says that you have to keep any formal discipline in your personnel file forever. And so, you know, that was, you know, I think I say that because it highlights that takes not only changing the policy, but also educating, you know, the police officers, right? And making sure that we are in line with them. And so we spent a considerable amount of time last few weeks talking to all the officers and be like, hey, these are changes we're making. This isn't us being overbearing. This isn't, you know, us saying, hey, we're going to keep these because we want to. There's just a lot at play when it comes to the changes on the legal side of stuff that is also making this different. Now, you know, I always preface this by saying, you know, our department does not have, we have awesome officers, right? We do not, you know, obviously in any large, you know, or any size, large group of people, you're always going to have issues that arise. But at the end of the day, we don't have any systemic, you know, issues as it relates to officer credibility, whether as it relates to, you know, bias or any of those things. And so I can't say enough where the comfortable thing for us is that we get to tell our officers this stuff, but we get to say, hey, just keep doing what you're doing, you know, and all will be well. But it's just spelled out, you know, a lot more, especially in this personnel complaint one, where it talks about exactly what our duties are, or supervisor duties and things of that nature.
Yeah, and Chief Shaparsky alluded to it. You're right, something about like those, you know, since essentially 2020, right? I think, you know, there's been reform across the country on, right, personnel packets and, you know, previous discipline histories and stuff like that. When ultimately, right, we've seen in policing across the country more lateral hires, right, lateral transfers, right, of bringing in experienced officers to your department. You know, there's been some bad examples of that, right? You know, not within our department, but across the country, you know, where they hired some officers that probably had some, you know, previous history of some discipline that necessarily wasn't disclosed. You know, so now, and again, it's important that we have these things in place. So again, if one of our officers, right, or if we're looking to hire, right, a lateral transfer or a lateral hire for us, that we can go and review, right, all of this stuff, in which, you know, we have to keep now in their personnel files. And again, that's across the board, so we can make sure we're not, you know, not hiring somebody else's problem, right? You know, if there's some failures on their end and some discipline issues, regarding, use of force or whatnot, then it's important that we know those things and can obviously make an educated decision on whether to hire that person or not. So again, these are some things that are in place now and that have changed over recent years that require us to maintain those records, which is important, right? So that we're not, so we can understand those things and hire those people.
As far as record keeping, I can't really stress enough that we need to get copies of that, because we're in a situation now with someone who is trying to receive benefits and they damaged some property purposely, but we have no record of it. So I'm working with this department saying I gotta have this information. Otherwise, they're going to give him the benefit of unemployment because we don't have the documents in personnel. So
Right.
most of those inquiries come to personnel, and when we pull their file and we don't see anything, we don't respond correctly. And so what happens is the city may end up paying. It could be unemployment, it could be for something different, but we need a copy of all of those things so we have it in their file. So when those inquiries do come to us, we can just pull the file, because we call the department like, well, it might be upstairs in this file, but
Right.
it's gonna take me a while to look for it, but they don't give us a while to respond.
Yeah.
So I just ask that you share that information with personnel as well. As far as the screenings for drug testing, we've had some information that hasn't been clear across the board to other departments about those tests, those screenings, and just want to make sure that we're working well, and that information comes back to us and we share it with you all. But also, if there is an accident and with an officer, they need to get screened, and it's not based on how much the damage is that they were in some type of accident. So we're working on our handbooks to specify, doesn't matter if it's minor or major accident, we're still sending them off. It's not about the property damage.
Right.
It's about making sure that the employee is clean.
Well, I think that highlights another kind of point that we've made, and I pulled up the drug and alcohol screening procedure here, and we've also referred, right, in various spots throughout our policies when there is overlap with city policy, we were able to essentially add a section in there, with policy 108, Michigan City drug, so that'd be, the city of Michigan City's policy that we can, or rule or policy that we can impose in our own, and that's done. We did that with, I know, the drug screening, the accident ones, we've noted it in, just to obviously try to bridge that gap that you're saying, and that certainly has been something that we've been working on too with our own people, is making those things readily available, right? Because I'd rather get a question about, hey, what's city policy 108 or something like that versus some kind of open-ended question regarding where do I go for screening, or what do I need to do now that I've been.
Yeah, I was reading, there was a part in the drug part of Officer May, said something to the effect he may take a drug test or.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to look at that section a little bit more carefully, because I saw some language in there. I think we need to just,
Yeah.
the drug testing.
Well, again,
It
just,
says employee may be.
yeah, I mean, just right here in this section
Yeah,
here.
where it should be shall.
Shall, yeah.
It should be shall.
Shall.
And there was something else that talks about substantial property damage. I just think we just strike substantial and just say property damage.
Property damage.
Yeah.
That's number
Just
10057, number 4. Is what you're referencing. Yeah. And also with EAP, we provide it for everyone, and I'm trying to find where it mentioned that like it was a possibility. It's not a possibility. We offer it to everyone and anyone. So probably can reference. You did reference contacting personnel, but we do have it for everybody. It's not, we don't pick and choose. We provide it for everyone. Where did I see that?
Do you remember offhand where the,
I'm looking to see if I can find it. It's in 1005.5. It says there may be available a voluntary employee assistance program. There is a voluntary employee assistance program. And it's not mandated by us, or we don't get the information. We give them the links to go to, and that information is between them
Kyle, you
and
just
the
gonna make that
provider.
change now? Kyle, you just gonna make that change?
You're talking, you want me to do it right now?
I would think so if we can. There may be, right, in section A there, right, there is,
Mm-hmm.
so there is a voluntary, is what you would like it to say?
Yes, we do have one available for all employees.
Is.
So we actually have two separate, well, they're not separate, but they're the same company. But one is you can yourself as the employee contact them and ask for assistance. And then for those who have positive testing, we send them off to an employee assistance program as well.
Did you say there, you guys, did you reference 107 as needing something too? Sick leave, actually, did you say something about that?
Amber, you were talking about accidents.
Accidents, yeah.
Yes, it was,
Yeah.
she was talking, too far.
It's 1005.7.
Number 4.
Yeah, subsection A4. Just strike the word substantial. Well, we may want to strike it in 3 too.
Yeah, just property damage.
On that member screening part, I'm gonna do a member can be ordered to submit, since it's saying this is the random one. Because I don't think necessarily every person will be ordered to take a random drug test, or is this the new? Oh, this is the member screening. Okay, gotcha.
So everyone is in the pool. It just depends on if their name is pulled or not.
It's 10:30. Let me see the context.
Yeah, see.
10:33.
Because I don't know if it's alluding to the random, because I mean, we obviously have our own the pre-employment stuff where you have, which is referenced up above, where they get the drug scheme pre-employment. If we're talking about random drug testing, then I think the verbiage might need to be a member can be ordered to submit.
Because if you say shall, right, you're saying they, everybody's,
And I could even
member shall
rename
be,
the section if we want to talk member random screening or something like that.
I'm almost thinking it shall though, because if policy 108 kicks in, then it will be a shall. Because if it's a random or with cause.
The member doesn't get an option, right?
Yeah, I
Maybe
think
You
I
have
think
to
it's
go,
a shall.
so.
Because once those,
So
either those conditions kick in, because you've already talked about pre-employment, right? About that.
correct.
And that one already has, yeah, shall. Just want to add something like If a member is drawn for a random test, that member shall.
So I'm thinking a member shall submit to a drug or alcohol screening
In accordance
in
with.
accordance, yeah, to policy.
When random.
Because policy 108 is the one that dictates that.
Correct.
So when we invoke 108, then a member shall submit.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because it should be verbatim to the city's policy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's why we ultimately end up quoting the specific policy in here, because we kind of went down that road of like, well, let's put the city policy in here. Like, well, what if it changes? Then we got to go back. And so I think if we can introduce the member screening portion of this in a way that just ultimately falls onto 108, I think that would be the preferential thing. So,
Member shall submit to, in accordance with policy 108. Yeah.
We're good now.
Yeah.
so then we had the drug free. And then was there another one? You said 1005. We did that one. There's a couple changes we made there. Was there another one?
Question about 1007. Here, sick leave. Do you, well, I didn't see a reference to your sick bank, and I know we keep going back and forth on sick days and sick bank. So is it something that you're going to address in this policy? Because we don't address it in our policy at all.
Let's see. So this would be a sick leave, and then the sick bank is mandated. It's essentially laid out in our contract. So if we wanted to reference sick bank,
I don't think they can expound on it without a change in the contract, though.
Okay.
I think you guys are bound by what's in the contract, right?
Yeah.
How
Right.
you implement, and the officers implement use of it. Are you asking more about record keeping then?
Mm-hmm.
It's more of record keeping of when they're using their bank versus when they're using their current year's allotment, correct?
Yes, so we get questions from employees, and we really don't have answers for them in reference to the sick bank. We can't tell them what they have, and I know I've talked to you guys about records that we have is different from records that you have, so I'm just trying to make sure that what we tell them is the correct thing, because they'll come back and say, well, they told me I have this, and that is not necessarily the case.
Is it a coding issue though? I mean, is it?
It's not in
something
our
that-
system.
But could we code it differently? You know what I mean?
I know on the, it's all, so it's, when it goes to payroll, if you will,
Yeah.
the hours are coded
From the bank?
different than the bank.
That's
than
what I'm talking
from
about.
Sick leave.
Okay, so you can discern which is which. Okay.
Yeah, so, but I think to your point, it just takes us making sure that in January that the numbers are right. And I think that's just connecting Miss Connie with you guys so that you guys have all those right numbers when we start, because obviously some change, well, the sick bank stuff doesn't ever change, but it's knowing that, hey, you know, this person as of January 1 has this amount of time left in their in sick leave or the bank or whatever, and then that goes forward from there. Because I recall what you're talking about, and I think that we're always in that crosshair between, even if the officers are aware of like our contract or of our policy, sometimes they just don't, you know, take the time to educate themselves so that they know what to ask for when going forward, or they don't advise you guys and then advise us. And I think that's where we've got to figure out, to your point, maybe how to better kind of grease that wheel, so to speak, so everyone's on the same page. So maybe we can, I'll think about that, maybe figure something out.
Kyle, maybe, right? But we have, I would say, we talked about payroll codes and/or, right, we're currently using PACE, right, scheduler, right, in which we can keep, and we already distinguish the difference between sick days and sick bank, right? So we'll have, a historical record also through that, right, scheduling software which we have that can, again, it already distinguishes the difference between the two, which would give us, right, the accurate amount of days remaining, you know, and whatnot too. So again, you know, it's one of those things laid out in the contract, right, under what section here? Article 10, supplemental benefits. So again, obviously we reference the contract in that policy.
What were you looking at?
What's that?
What are you looking at right now?
In the contract. Yeah, supplemental benefits under the FOP contract. Supplemental benefits, section D is lays out sick days for us. So again, I think we have an accurate way to depict, you know, I think just that constant communication with personnel, you know, on regarding return dates and or dates used, right? We can always give, let's say, updates, right, when people are off, you know, on extended periods.
Also, on the, we haven't addressed it in the handbook, but in the drug and alcohol free, we haven't really addressed the off-duty side of it. The question has come up for us though, if someone who works for the city is squirrely and does something crazy, drinking and driving or whatever, how do we handle those things? And I know what people do on their personal time is pretty much their personal business, but it also can be dependent upon what role they play in the city. So for police officers specifically, do you have something that you think should be added to this about off-duty challenges?
If I'm hearing you right, you're saying, obviously as a police officer, we have a duty to maintain a positive image, if you will, no matter what, if we're on duty or off. And that's really, after personnel, there's section 11, which is the 21 rules of conduct.
Yeah.
When somebody gets disciplined, we cite rules under there. And so, for example, rule number 1, right, affirmatively promoting and a positive public image. So if someone is, you know, intoxicated at a bar, gets in a fight and, you know, and conducts himself in an unprofessional manner, then we would cite this rule as a valid violation. And we can always buddy those up. When we do disciplinary stuff, we will buddy up rules of conduct with policy violations. And that's also, you know, again, a good lead, kind of a point as to why we include the 21 rules of conduct in our policy manual, because you can be held accountable and be disciplined for violations of these rules. And, you know, when you look at, you know, you know, there's actually, you know, rule number 3 specifically talks about alcohol use and related conduct for us. And so that's where I think the heart of the point that you're making is truly addressed in some of these rules of conduct. Maybe not specifically spelled out in the drug-free workplace type thing, but then just carved out in its own specific rule with our expectations listed.
And again, you know, like Chief already alluded to, that these obviously the 21 rules of conduct, right, are those rules, like you said, sorry, expound a little bit farther on, right? I mean, essentially rules of conduct, promoting a positive image, aiding other members, drug and alcohol use, maintaining an acceptable level of availability, right, for work. Then we get into committing or condoning sexual, racial, religious, national origin, or ethnic harassment, committing unsafe acts, the list goes on. Again, these are obviously rules in which we, at the police department, right, we operate under many different umbrellas, right? Our rules, our conducts, our policies and procedures, and then also, right, city handbook as well. So again, I think it's important to note that. Again, that's why we ultimately have included, right, the rules of conduct into our policy manual now, right? So again, that stuff is readily available, and again, at times, right, in which we could reference the city handbook and certain policies, we've tried to do so. So again, we're covering all of those umbrellas in which we operate under.
So does the city have a policy in regards to employees' conduct when they're off duty, when they're not working?
Nah, we've discussed it.
That's the difference, Yeah.
We do not.
So we understand officers are looked at
Yeah.
differently, but still.
Yeah, but that's a city policy, right, in which they don't offer, right?
Correct.
But again, that's something that, again, we obviously cover here under essentially Rule 1 for us, right? The first line, right? Members shall conduct themselves on and off duty in a way that does not damage or have the probability, expectations, right, of damaging the organization's public image, integrity, or reputation. So, city needs a
Exactly.
nice little policy or a one-liner like that, right? Again, obviously, right, it's,
So in the city drug policy,
I
right?
can't arrest nobody. I don't have the power.
Under section 4, there's prohibited substances, illegally controlled substances or drugs. Schedule 1 through 4 are not to be used. I mean, that's in our city handbook anyway. So in Indiana, like marijuana as an example, is still illegal. So, you can't have it in your system. That's how I look at it. But.
again,
No phone numbers.
Yeah, and again, I think, as obviously police officers, right, members of the Michigan City Police Department, we're recognized outside of our agency or outside of our work hours as police officers. So it's important that we obviously always continue to uphold, right, our integrity, and make sure we're positively promoting ourselves and our departments. And again, I think that's something that can obviously be expounded on across citywide, right? As public servants.
Public service.
Right, so, again, people often, recognize us regardless, whatever capacity we may be, right? From police to, right, to,
Doesn't matter.
right, doesn't matter, to sanitation or whatnot, right? People recognize us outside of work, so I think it's important that we obviously always, continue to represent the city in a positive manner.
Yeah, we strive to become another all-American city as we were in '66.
Right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Is there any other questions? I think maybe regarding, we didn't really cover the 21 rules of conduct in depth. Again, these are standards in which we've had for probably 30 plus years.
Yeah.
And again, these are guidelines in which we hold, our people responsible for essentially every day, right? These rules are always in our mind and are determining factors in which we operate, and conduct ourselves.
So I have a question. Do we have reserve officers?
We've not had reserve officers for probably over 10 years. We still have it in our policy where we could add them. We just haven't been to that point to do that again. So,
But do they presently exist or you pay them out of the city budget?
We do not have any
yeah, it was
reserve.
all volunteer hours before.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not something we're against, I don't think by any means, but.
Yeah, again, nothing that, again, we're not against, but nothing that we foresee implementing, a reserve officer, policy within here. So we do have a policy, but we are not actively or going to seek reserve officers at this time. I think right now there's an opportunity for people that want to volunteer and get involved, with EMA, right? And we work obviously closely with them. There's something that is established, and I think getting away from volunteers, wearing police uniforms, right? Regardless if it says reserve on it or not, right? The general public sees a Michigan City Police uniform and expects, right, all the things that come with that uniform, which are all these things in which we live by day to day. If we got to volunteer in that, in that capacity, it's kind of, somebody that's not living it, right, full time. So I think that's, waters in which we don't really want to tread. So if there's people that are interested in being a volunteer and wanting to help the police, we know there's an avenue in which they can do it under EMA, right, in which we're already in place and already operating with and, helping support, so.
Just a quick question. Rule 14 is the physical and mental readiness to perform duty. You guys see some awful and horrific things. Is mental health counseling readily available to all of the officers, and are they very aware of it?
Yeah, I think that's something that, we've started to and continue to implement over the last several years. Obviously, right, we have, an EAP program within the city. We have constructed essentially a peer support team within our department, right? Just obviously peer engagement, and that was voted on essentially by the body, right? Who are people that you trust and you confide in that you would want to come talk to in, a critical incident matter, right, in which you've experienced. And then we also expound on that and have essentially a county-wide peer support team in which, maybe I don't want to go talk to my coworker, right, but maybe I'm comfortable going to talk to maybe, a LaPorte city officer, a LaPorte County EMS, or, a fireman or something. And then again, we do have some resources available in which we've, used some culturally competent clinicians, right? So people that understand, I would say, first responders,
Yeah.
and or can help get them, that can talk, right? That officers can talk to as well. So we have
Good.
those at our disposal, essentially through the, some partnerships at the MAC, which is over in Valparaiso, and they've done some good work as far as peer support and gathering those clinicians, right, in a group, in which I know Lieutenant Westfall has been a part of that peer support program there. So it kind of gives us an avenue in which we can essentially send officers, right, that, hey, we see, you dealt with some, crazy things here in the last 6 months or whatnot. Go talk to somebody, right? I think, the day and age of, just hold it in and bury it, right? Those things are past, right? It's important for us to talk about those things and recognize those things. And, whether it's in large groups or small groups or one-on-ones, with people that we're comfortable talking to, it's, important that we have those avenues for our people.
Well, I think too, one of the things that's driven that is officer willingness. I think in the last 5 years especially, there's been a huge uptake in officers willing to talk and go and, seek that treatment or that help or whatever that may look like, and so I think that's really what pushed, to your point, getting those resources available. They've been there for a long time, but it's like, we can, hey, you need to go talk to someone and do it. Officers are, in the past, we go, well, how many times I got to do this so I can get the check mark, right? They go through the motion. But what we're seeing now, especially with the younger generation of officer coming through, is that they are way more willing to go to the table and seek those out, which is a good, right, at the end of the day, because then it really addresses kind of this whole rules of conduct thing to begin with, where if we can address the problems early, then it's not going to turn into other issues later down the road that may, call that officer into question. So
Any other questions, comments, concerns for us right now regarding essentially 6 through 11?
I did not have any.
I think ultimately then next week we would start moving into our procedures manual, right?
I haven't either.
I think the big thing with the procedures manual is, and we purposely did the policies first. The procedures are just a restating of the policy, but then the how-to. So I encourage you guys to not get lost in the weeds on those, because you've already reviewed what we are defined by. And I think one I meant to touch on earlier too, where we had before kind of lacked foundation is our social media policy.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure you guys have all seen TikTok videos or Instagram reels of officers, and there's that fine line of officers making videos of themselves to better, just as a fun or whether or not using their position to try to promote themselves to, for various other reasons that maybe wouldn't fall into line. And so the 1029 really truly does do a good job of kind of addressing what our expectation is of our officers when it comes to social media. It's not going away, it's here, and it can be used in positive ways, and we have several officers in our department now that use it to promote the department or to promote becoming a police officer or promote the good work that they do. And so establishing where that line in the sand is very important. But when you start going through these procedures, you're going to feel like you're reading things twice again, because you're going to say, well, did I read this before? And the answer is yes. You read it before the policy manual, but the procedures are truly meant for like the younger officers that come on, that's like, well, how do I do this? And I think some people will get a lot out of the field training officer program that we have. But the procedures, if they really are sitting at home and they want to try to, tomorrow I'm going to focus on, driving under the influence enforcement or something like that, they can really arm themselves before going into that situation to know kind of what it takes to not only appease the policy, but know how to do it. So, don't get discouraged if you feel like you're reading things twice again.
Well, I think you guys have done a heck of a job with the policies. Right?
So we can be reserve officers after this.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
You have a good understanding.
I will say that, Lieutenant Westfall really kind of took this under his wing for a good over a year, trying just kind of going through all this and making it applicable to Michigan City. And then Captain Urbancic really got the policies or the procedures done as well. So it's been a team effort, but they definitely need some recognition for the work they do.
And I'm glad to hear that the promotional exam would be geared more towards this
Correct.
than all that supervision 101 and, yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. Ultimately, right, we always talk about the critical incidents, whether it's use of force or vehicle pursuits and whatnot. Right? Those are some of the, foundational things that we see, not every day, but they happen, right? They happen here. And so it's important that our supervisors, right, you have an expanded role now, and you need to have the critical understanding of these things, because ultimately, right, you can be held liable for those things. So, and it's important so that we understand it and we operate within it, and are making those good judgment calls. And because again, you might just get a few bars or stripes on your sleeves and whatnot, but you ultimately, right, the responsibility that comes with that is tremendous.
Exactly.
So again, it's important that we have a promotional process that really dives into, how we operate.
And to your point earlier, I think since 2018, when we updated all these, 2/3 of our department has been hired since then. So that's a lot of young, people that need this guidance to know and do the right thing. So
Very young.
I'm gonna send you guys a copy of the updated drug policy, because the one you have is not our most recent policy.
okay.
Is that the attachment there?
Yeah.
Yep.
Is there any?
So just with that real quick, like cases like that, just say, right, we had something in here that was out of date. Is that necessarily something that needs Board of Works approval, like going forward in the future? Like if it's a simple update in a for us, like to update our accident policy, right? Where we just essentially have a hyperlink or something like that,
Let me think that one through.
you know,
Let
so,
me look at the statute and think that one through.
you know, and or if it's state mandate.
Just something that's a no-brainer. Yeah.
Correct, you know,
Yeah.
which ultimately, I would assume that policy has been approved by the Board of Works,
Yeah.
right?
Let me
Is
look
there
at
a
the
reason
statute.
for us to?
A minor. It's a minor update.
Correct.
Not just a-
You know, and or is there any other minor updates that may fall under that type of category? I'm sure we could probably come up with a few examples as we start to see some of these updates roll in from Lexipol. You know, we can essentially start running them through your office, Amber, and see if there's, you know, whether, if it seeks approval or just notification,
Yeah.
you
I
know.
think that's a very good point because it sounds like you guys are getting daily updates.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, there was like 6 or 7.
What was it? It was like 11.
Yeah, I think it was 11 updates, right?
Yeah.
Luckily, they were all under
State mandate.
this, the bottom of the ones we just reviewed, so I'm like,
Wait, otherwise
perfect.
we can just leave this standing slot on the agenda.
Right.
The first thing in the morning.
Yeah, so, you know, again, is it a major update that warrants review, or is it just a,
I'm almost thinking we could do like a resolution of the Board of Works, just defining what a minor and a major.
right, what
I like
requires
that.
approval and what,
Yeah, that's where my mind's going.
you
I
know,
really
what
like that.
requires, you know, it's all essentially just notification, right? You know, this policy was updated on this date.
Yeah, that's
See
where my
below.
mind's going.
And then it could go on the agenda just as a communication.
Right.
That's that.
Okay.
I think most of the updates that, well, all the updates that Lexipol push forward are always objective and/or part of state mandates or federal mandates. The only updates that we would make, I would consider more like subjective, where if we're changing something that we're doing that's unique to our department, or, you know, something along those lines, where I feel like we'd probably come to you guys and let you know.
Yeah,
Objective or a brand new policy
Yeah.
that you've never enacted.
Or would that, could there be procedural changes that aren't policy changes?
Yeah, possibly. I think that, yeah, I mean, potentially,
Yeah.
correct.
yeah, there could be.
I don't think, I
Not
don't
driven
know
by
if
state or
Lexipol.
federal law.
Yeah, like, and again, I think the only time that I could see a situation where there's a legal update that then affects the procedure of that,
Correct.
and I think that would probably fall in line with the first portion what we're talking about. And you know, other than that, you know, I think the one thing that we were relieved by, at least I was, when I went over this, is that none of this that we're pushing today changes fundamentally what we're doing, and so that's kind of reassuring to me to say, okay, maybe the written words were out of date, but the practical practice of what we're doing is consistent, you know, with.
So you guys are doing the right thing.
Correct.
Yeah, or we update with the times, you know, things of that nature, you know, as we get notified of legal updates or whatever. So I think the procedural update side of it is often just kind of checking that box, as we kind of talked about earlier.
Right.
Did you have anything else to add?
No.
All right, well, thank you guys very much. Same time, same place next week.
All right, thank you.
See you guys this evening.
Oh, you guys get back.